Welcome. I'm your host, Tiffany Walters, and today we have Michael Roche from Harder, Seacrest and Emery LLP law firm, and he's here today to talk to us about cannabis and the laws. With all the confusion in New York State, we're going to clear up some things for you. So welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into law and specifically cannabis law?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, my name is Mike Roche. I've been a lawyer at Harder, Seacrest and Emery for, 8 years now. 7 of those have been spent working in the food and beverage industry and specifically helping alcohol beverage clients. The very interesting thing with cannabis when it came up was that New York State based it very heavily on the alcohol beverage law. So once we started diving into that, it was a perfect fit. Everything that you kind of see on the alcohol side, you see parallels on the cannabis side, which makes it just a truly a natural fit for what I've done in my career up to now.
Okay, so an easy transition. Yes.
Easy transition.
Yep. And so so I have a few questions that I want you to just kind of go over as far as the legislation and the legalities of cannabis in New York State. There's some things that are confusing, and so I want to clear it up for the general public and the businesses in New York State that are looking to get into this. So the first question I want to ask you is, can you explain the legalities around the term gifting, we'll say, when it comes to cannabis in New York State, and what's currently legal and not for both businesses and consumers?
So we'll start with kind of where things are right now with cannabis. Right now, obviously, we've got the legalization law that was adopted back in April. So that's out there. You can carry cannabis with you. There's nothing wrong with
3 ounces, right?
Yeah, you can grow a certain amount at your house. All of that is legal. What the law set up but has not gotten to yet and has not been implemented is the actual industry that's going to be in place with growers who actually cultivate this in the field, processors who turn it into a final product, and then ultimately retailers. That structure is still, it's been set up, but there's nothing in place to do anything with it yet. And the reason for that is because there's no Cannabis Control Board, there's no Office of Cannabis Management. Well, actually, I say that the Cannabis Control Board was actually just finalized, I think, today.
Yes, appointed.
I saw an article this morning. The last 2 people were appointed by Governor Hochul. So we do have a Cannabis Control Board now. I need to get used to saying that we have a Cannabis Control Board. It's brand new today. We still don't really have an Office of Cannabis Management, though. We've got an executive director, but my understanding is they're still in the process of hiring staff. And then once that staff gets in place, they'll start coming up with the regulations that actually govern this industry, and then develop the application forms that you need in order to go get your license. So that's kind of where things stand. Right now, there's a lot that's still up in the air and not yet to be decided. So now we'll actually dive into your question about gifting. And it's an interesting one because the law is very clearly tailored towards the sale of cannabis. And particularly sale by licensed businesses.
Correct.
There's a little bit in there about what people can grow at home and what they can carry on their own, but the law was clearly meant towards the sale by businesses. The way I approach things is from the alcohol perspective, because like I said, there's a lot of parallels between the law. So in terms of what you can do, one individual to another individual, I don't think there's going to be any issue with gifting. Think about you have friends over to your house. You can serve them a bottle of wine or something.
Right.
You could light up a joint if you wanted to. I don't think there's going to be any issues with that. When it comes to gifting in as a business, and you read articles about people who, here, buy this $70 t-shirt and we'll include a free eighth with it.
Yes.
That's where you start running into issues, I think. There you're truly distributing cannabis at a retail level.
Right.
You're not just sharing it among individuals. Once you start sharing it at a retail level, the Office of Cannabis Management, when it's formed, is going to say, no, you really should be licensed in order to do that. Yeah.
And that comes with the liabilities, right? There's liability
right.
in the business and serving something that you're not licensed to sell. One, two, it hasn't passed those strict, what we know will be, those lab tests that New York State is going to want. So things like that, right? So we need to be careful towing the line right now as businesses.
Right. And the other thing that we haven't really touched on is the tax.
Right, the tax. That's right.
Which,
they wouldn't get any.
Right. New York State has put a specific tax on cannabis. And, if there's one thing that departments of tax have shown, it's that they're very good at seeing through what you term things and recharacterizing it as what they think it is. There's a doctrine called the step transaction doctrine, where they'll take individual steps in a transaction that each individually would be tax-free, but as a whole would be taxed. And tax departments use that to combine individually tax-free steps into a single taxable transaction. Okay. So they've done this. They've recharacterized things in the past as, something that we tried to say was not taxable, but really is taxable because of what you're actually doing. And they're going to do that exact same thing here. They're going to look at, a $70 t-shirt and say, no one's paying $70 for a t-shirt. You paid $10 for the t-shirt. That's subject to standard sales tax. And you paid the other $60 for the eighth of cannabis. And that's going to be subject to the cannabis tax.
Got you. So it's pretty clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So next we'll move on to the best advice that you can offer anyone that's transitioning into the legal cannabis industry. So maybe they were, they're accustomed with selling marijuana, but not legally. And now they want to get into the business from a legal standpoint. What type of advice could you give them?
Yeah, so the type of advice that I can give is probably not what they want to hear right now, given where things stand, but it's follow the law, which right now would be don't sell. The real risk you have in kind of jumping the gun on this is that the Office of Cannabis Management is going to see your application at some point. And if they're aware that you've violated the law, then they're going to look at you differently than somebody who is coming at this with a completely clean record. And I know, pre-legalization, there are going to be issues back there. And I don't think those are going to hurt, the application process. What I'm talking about is this interim period where it's legalized, but there's no process for actually selling. This is where you want to be complying with the law, because if you can't comply with it now, they're going to look at you and say, why couldn't you just wait, a year?
Right. And to jump the gun. And that's what I think too. And there's other ways that these businesses can be branding themselves and getting themselves out there without actually selling cannabis. And that's where they need to focus on, is building their brand versus, trying to kind of mix the underground market with the legal market. So I think that's great advice. And I hope they take heed to that.
It's just important to know, because a lot of people are thinking, it's gonna be 6 months where I can't operate in this business. And it's unfortunate, but it's better to live with those 6 months and get your license than, try to operate underground during these 6 months and then find out because you did that, the Office of Cannabis Management isn't going to give you one.
Right. And then all your work is for what, right? And
Yeah, it's
and we want this community, especially because New York is speaking of equity, to really be involved and really know the regulations. And so they should use this time to educate themselves and read up on the New York state legislations. Like you said, everything isn't clear, but there is an outline, there is a framework,
right.
and that's clear. So yeah. Can you explain briefly banking legalities in cannabis? That can be confusing to anyone thinking about getting into the cannabis industry. You know, if you put money in a bank, it's not federally legal right now. So,
Right.
what does that mean? What does that mean for a cannabis company?
So, and you read horror stories out in Colorado and Washington, and even just next door in Massachusetts about people that have to have, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash on their premises because of this very issue.
Yeah.
Uh, and it all gets back to the fact that cannabis is still, and for the foreseeable future, will be a Schedule I drug. And banks are not allowed to accept money that they are aware is involved in illegal activity. So, unfortunately, federally chartered banks cannot take that money. That applies to federal credit unions as well. So, think about a lot of people I've heard have thought about, can I use a credit union? If it's a federal credit union, they're subject to the same rules. But what you can look at are state chartered banks. And there aren't as many, and it's a little bit harder to find them, but they're out there.
Okay.
And state chartered banks are not subject to the same rules as federally chartered banks. They don't lose their charter just because they violated the federal law.
Okay. That's
Uh,
interesting and very good to know because
yeah.
it is a
Now
scary thing to
that
think
doesn't
that.
mean that
Go
it
ahead.
doesn't mean that a state chartered bank is going to accept you as a client. They
Mm-hmm.
may take the position, you know what, it's still illegal at the federal level. We don't want to be involved with that. They may still say no, but they at least legally can say yes.
Okay, so if you're convincing, you might be able to get a bank. But it's a scary thought to think that you can open up a business, be successful, and then have no method to protect your money, or even do transactions digitally. So yeah, it's something to think about. Thank you for sharing.
And even worse would be potentially having the money seized.
And
Uh,
that's what's the scary part. If you put it in, can the federal government take it? Yeah, they can, right?
they can,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Uh, the one thing that I've been seeing conflicting reports on this, but I think Stripe, which is a credit card processing company,
mhm.
I think I've seen some instances where they have agreed to process cannabis-related transactions. So
Okay.
that does, if what I'm seeing is correct, and I haven't seen anything definitive, you may be able to get credit card transactions. The issue is, as soon as that credit card processes, you need to take it out into cash.
Got it. Right. Because right. It's complicated.
Right.
Well, thank you for kind of clearing that up and giving us some advice there. And lastly, I just want to ask you, Michael, what do you think is the most important thing that a prospective cannabis entrepreneur should focus on during this time that they're waiting for the finalization of the laws in New York?
So in addition to the complying through this kind of weird interim period, I would say just focus on getting things ready. When those applications go live, there is going to be a rush to get them. And we don't know if there's going to be limits on the number of applicants that get a license.
Like with the medical. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the medical, I think it was what, 4
Yeah. And they
way
can
back.
only open 5, I think, dispensaries and right. So it's very limited.
Yeah. So the Office of Cannabis Management does have the ability to put limits in place again on the adult use. I don't know if they're going to do that. They haven't signaled one way or another, but that's something they could do.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do that, you're better off getting your application in first rather than last.
Right.
And even then, we don't know what the, assuming they put limitations in, we don't know what the allocation is going to look like. You know, is it going to be, there's 1,000 for the whole state and it's first come, first serve? Or is it going to be, you know, we're going to allocate
By county.
50 to New York City and, you know,
Right.
something like that. And then we don't know how they're going to allocate it even within that. You know, is it going to
Right.
be,
The on-site dispensary distributor, right? Farming.
well, and I'm actually thinking about the equity and
Oh,
inclusion
right.
provisions of the law. You know, you
50%.
think about, is there going to be some sort of, you know, point system or what
Mhm.
have you that, you know, if you're a woman minority owned business, that gets you to the front of the line, and
Right.
we just don't know that. So it's getting ready now and being in a position to submit your applications as soon as they're released is the best thing you can do. Because again, we just don't know what it's going to look like. It might be the Wild West, or it might be very rigid and structured.
Right.
Um,
We have
there's
no
just,
idea yet.
right. So
Patiently waiting.
yeah, it's better to be first than last.
And so that means just using this time to get prepared, you know, thinking about what you want to do, what side of the business you want to get into. I mean, there's so many different businesses and industries, you know, I mean, that feed into this industry, you know, from bath products to food, to
Mhm.
drinks. I mean, it's wide ranging. So there's a lot that people should think about.
Yeah, and particularly what side you want to be on, because if you land on the manufacturer, the, you know, the growth and processing side, then you can't end up on the retail side later, and vice
Right.
versa. There's a hard line down the middle between processing and distributing and retail sales.
Yes, you
So
make a good point. The licenses are very specific about what you can do and what you cannot do. And combining those things, you can't deliver if you don't have a delivery license. You can't sell or do on-site consumption, as we see, without those licenses. So
right,
yeah. Well, thank you,
Did-
Michael. I appreciate your time. Thank you for
yeah,
giving us this information. And I hope we can do this again soon. Um, yeah.
yeah. Likewise, thank you. It was a pleasure, and again, let me know however I can help. I'm always willing to talk with somebody and try to help answer questions.
Awesome. We appreciate it at NYSCC. Thank you so much.
Thank you.